one and all, and listen to tales of excitement and adventure. Tales of daring heroes, savage monsters, and bards who just couldn't keep it in their pants. Tales of friendship, nobility, drunken foolishness, and unforgettable fun. These are tales of role-playing games, fair listeners, and this is Rollin' Bones. My name is Ryan Howard, and I shall be your guide. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Rollin' Bones, your RPG treasure trove. I am your host and king of the boneheads, Ryan Howard, and tonight we are going to be talking about running a Western game. This is something that has been on my mind quite a bit recently, just because the Deadlands, the Weird West Kickstarter is shipping. I'm expecting my copy any day now. We'll do something when it gets here, some kind of unboxing or something like that. Yes, you can see my paint supplies behind me there. So you know that I'm serious about all this. For anyone who is audio exclusive, which is most of you, the area behind me is my designated painting area, and it is an organized mess, I think is the best way to put it. Everything's in drawers. It doesn't look amazing, but everything is organized in a way that I can, easily find stuff if I need it. Basically, it's all kind of taken care of as far as that goes. But yeah, this is my office. This is where I do my work. And where I have fun. I do a lot in this room, this tiny little room. Anyway, tonight, like I said, we're going to talk about Western games. This is another How Ryan Would Run episode. And this one's a little bit different from the others. Western games, I feel like, are worlds apart from what we discussed with Star Wars and superheroes, because Western games, more so than either of those two, for one, they're not tied to a specific IP. Superheroes don't necessarily have to be, but when you're playing a superhero game, a lot of IPs come to mind that very much kind of influence the way that you would think to run your game. Definitely the way that you interact with your players. But with Western games, what you're dealing with is a situation that's actually very similar to what you would have in a Dungeons & Dragons type setting. There's a lot of potential for high adventure and shenanigans and fun. Well, there's potential for fun in any role-playing game, but the potential for D&D type fun to take place in a Western game. The potential is there. It's great. And there's a lot to talk about with that. So let's get right into it. First things first, I'm going to talk a little bit about Westerns in general, the different, tones and things that you can do within a Western setting. And then about halfway through, I'm going to show you guys some resources for running a Wild West RPG. So, Westerns. For anyone who's not from the US and isn't familiar with the genre, Westerns refers to tales about the American frontier specifically in the 19th century. Now, there's some wiggle room in there as far as what constitutes a Western. The notion of it being frontier is of utmost importance. Typically, actually, not even typically, it's mandatory. Your westerns have to be set west of the Mississippi River, and most of them are set between the Civil War, the American Civil War, and the dawn of the 20th century. You can go as far as the start of World War One for kind of the boundaries of a Western. And they deal with characters on the frontier, basically just trying to live their lives, trying to tame an untamed land, trying to run away from their pasts and create a new future for themselves. It's a lot of rugged individualism. It's a lot of danger around every corner. It takes a hard person to live in the West. That's what a lot of Western stories end up being. Now, there's a lot of room in there as far as kinds of stories you can tell, tones that you can tell. So I'm going to go over to my notes here and go through some of these types of Westerns that are typically told. So, within Westerns, you have genres, is the best way to put it. There are subgenres of Westerns that definitely differentiate from each other. I'm not explaining this very well, so I'll jump in and tell you guys what I'm trying to talk about here. So first of all, first one we have to talk about is the pulp Western, or the heroic Western. These are emblematic of Western movies that are made in the 1930s all the way through the 1960s. Shows like Bonanza and Gunsmoke are very much like this. The Lone Ranger is probably the most quintessential example of a pulp Western. Basically, your heroes are bold, dashing, square-jawed, wearing a white cowboy hat. They're do-gooders, they're lawmen, just trying to do what's right. And, fighting the bad guys when they have to, that kind of stuff. That's what you're dealing with. Your bad guys are going to be, wearing black hats. They're going to be tying women to railroad tracks and, shooting miners and stuff like that. Miners being people working in mines, not kids. That's a different genre of Westerns. Yes, you don't pull the mask off the old Lone Ranger. And as far as Elfie's suggestion of listening to Patrick Stewart's Cowboy album, I don't know if that actually exists, but that video's hilarious. Patrick Stewart singing cowboy songs is in fact hilarious. But yeah, a game like this, you'd be looking at something that's very lighthearted, very, very much in the spirit of fun. Not so much the kind of, dark and gritty and crazy stuff that you can get into with other genres. It's very much like a kid's version of the Wild West. Now, from there, we get into spaghetti westerns. Spaghetti westerns become very popular. They show up in the 60s. They become very popular in the 1970s. This is where Clint Eastwood's career really comes from. And they're called spaghetti westerns because the pioneers of this particular type of western, they were made in Italy, by Italian directors. Most of the cast spoke Italian, and then they were dubbed in English. So this is where people like Sergio Leone make a name for themselves. The best example of this is the movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. That's the quintessential spaghetti western. And what sets these things apart from the other westerns, this is where the aspects of moral ambiguity come in. The protagonists of spaghetti westerns are not lawmen in white cowboy hats, rounding up the bad guys, hanging them high, that kind of thing. The protagonists of spaghetti westerns are drifters, people with dark pasts, people who maybe aren't afraid to shoot a man in the back if they have to. Clint Eastwood is the prime example of this for anyone who hasn't seen the Dollars trilogy, which is a fistful of dollars for a few dollars more, and then the aforementioned The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And basically, this is kind of your gritty western in a lot of ways. Now, you can get even grittier. I'll talk about that with kind of the next entry here. But yeah, Elfie, I've gone back and forth about making you watch the Dollars trilogy. You'd be bored. That's the thing about these Western movies. Any of them, really. They're slow. A lot of these old ones can be a bit of a slow burn. They're very long sometimes, and if you don't like cowboys shooting each other, then you're probably not going to enjoy them. But again, if you don't enjoy cowboys shooting each other, then why are you wanting to know about me, running a Western game? Anyway, spaghetti westerns. This is more of your hard and heavy, hard boiled. Comes out of the 60s and 70s cinema landscape. Morally ambiguous western. Now from there we get to historical westerns. This is stuff like Tombstone, Deadwood, Outlaw Josie Wales to a certain extent. These are westerns that incorporate real events, in a lot of cases real people, but the stories that they're telling are fictionalized. The remake of True Grit would probably fall into this category. The original would be a pulp western, because a lot of those John Wayne movies are pulp westerns. And these are not hard and fast as far as these genres go, but basically historical westerns are, when you want to portray events that happened or people who existed, but you want to do so in the fictionalized way. Again, my favorite Western movie, one of my favorite movies of all time, is Tombstone, which is a historical Western. These can be very interesting if everyone at your table is interested in history. If not, I'd avoid this. The Deadlands incident, which I've talked about several times on this show, that shows you what happens when you focus on history and no one else at the table cares. Now, it's interesting about historical westerns, because they're fictionalized, you can very easily mix this with either pulp westerns or spaghetti westerns. You can do a gritty morally ambiguous story that involves, Billy the Kid or Jesse James or someone like that, you can very easily go down the pulp route. You can also, or the spaghetti route. You can also go down the pulp route with in any of those old movies about Wyatt Earp. Stuff like My Darling Clementine, Gunfight at OK Corral, The Adventures of Wyatt Earp, the TV series. A lot of that stuff is very pulpy and very much, Wyatt Earp is the upstanding good guy, the Cowboys are the bad guys, the Cowboys being the Cowboys gang. Which, for anyone who... I won't get into that because that's a whole thing. Watch the movie Tombstone. Highly recommend it. Watch the movie Tombstone. But, anyway. You can kind of play fast and loose with history, either in the gritty direction or in the heroic pulp direction, and it ends up working out. The last genre that I want to talk about here is Weird West. Weird West, for anyone who's familiar with Deadlands, this is where kind of your knowledge of Deadlands would come in. These are... This is the closest to D&D that you'll get with a Western game. Basically, magic, monsters, all of that stuff is present in a Wild West setting. So you've got, Native American shamans who can actually cast spells, and even, Christian clergy casting spells and stuff like that. You've got monsters in the plains, lots of zombies. Zombies are a favorite for a lot of Weird West games. A ghost town may literally be a town populated with ghosts, that kind of stuff. That's Weird West. And again, with this, you can go super dark and gritty and scary. This isn't a full-on Weird West movie, but there's a movie called Bone Tomahawk, which is a Western horror movie. Very grisly. I actually haven't seen Bone Tomahawk, but people tell me it is a shockingly gruesome film. So take that into consideration before you show it to your kids. But then there's also stuff like Wild Wild West would probably also fall into the Weird West category because of the gadgetry. It's a mixture of Weird West and pulp. There's not any monsters or anything in Wild Wild West. The only monsters are the ones who made the 1997 movie. But there's a lot of gadgets and steampunk stuff. Steampunk can be mixed with Westerns. You'll see that a lot in the Weird West genre. Steampunk's an odd bird, though. And something that I kind of have trouble with sometimes. I used to be super into it. Some people will argue that steampunk has to be specifically within the context of Victorian Britain. I have heard arguments otherwise that, say you can do a Western steampunk very easily. A lot of the same things that happened in Victorian Britain that led to kind of the speculative fiction of steampunk also happened in the US, just at kind of a different scale. There was a really great panel that I attended. It was Jim Butcher, author of the Dresden Files, and author of a book called The Aeronaut's Wendless, which is a steampunk book, talking to Sherry Priest, who is the author of the Clockwork Century series, which I view as the quintessential American steampunk series. It's very much, in a lot of places, Wild West steampunk. Most of it's set around the Seattle area. It's very, very good. Bone Shaker is the first book. If anyone wants to give that a try, that's Bone Shaker by Sherry Priest. The series is called Clockwork Century. Very good, highly recommend it. But they were talking, and Sherry Priest made the argument that really put forward, like, with the Civil War, technology grew far beyond what it would have without a war, because the two things that really push technology forward, according to her, are the pornography industry and war, which is true. The other arguments that she made were kind of comparing and contrasting what people view as the trappings of Victorian England that make it explicitly, that make steampunk explicitly a Victorian thing, and she went through how those are present in American history as well. You've got, industrialization. In the British Empire, you had near constant warfare. In the U.S., we just had one big war. And, well, actually, we did have constant warfare moving on from there, because you get into the Indian Wars, the Lincoln County Wars. If you think of the Wild West as basically one long war campaign of, expansion eastward with the U.S. Army, moving across, displacing Native Americans, but also bringing Eastern civilization to the West, which a lot of people in the West were fleeing. A lot of that's present too. You've got social upheaval with, the ending of de jure slavery, and again, people moving out to this frontier area where the social hierarchies are not present because the infrastructure is not present, and kind of just making their own hierarchies. That's very present in the Wild West. On and on and on. And basically what Sherry Priest did in Clockwork Century is she made the Civil War last all the way into the 1880s. And it continues throughout the book. So that's where all the crazy technology comes from. You've got oil-powered robots, basically, from Texas, where they discovered how to drill for oil. Some stuff is steam-powered. But it's a great series. It really is amazing. Lots of dirigibles, stuff like that. It's cool. But anyway, that's kind of covering your main genres there. Now, the next thing I want to talk about before we get into talking about the kind of stories that you can tell in Westerns, I want to talk about how Western games very much match what you get with fantasy role-playing, specifically the D&D variety of fantasy role-playing. The three pillars of D&D, and I'm sure you guys have heard this before, are combat, exploration, and roleplay. A lot of games outside of the context of D&D don't have those things in the same supply that D&D has. For example, Star Wars offers all of those things. They just look different. And they play out differently. And exploration doesn't just mean, we explore this land. It means we get in the ship and we go to another planet and explore that. Superhero games don't really offer the chance for exploration. Just due to the nature of superhero stories. You don't see a lot of comic books where characters are wandering around on quests or stuff like that. It's mostly, we have to fight the villain, we have to save the city, that kind of stuff. Westerns, due to just the nature of westward expansion, exploration, an environment that wants to kill you, quite frankly, everything's present there for a D&D type adventure. You could very easily have a quest-based dungeon crawl in a Western setting. The dungeon would be a ghost town, or an abandoned mine, or maybe if you're playing somewhere in like California or South Texas or something like that, they could be exploring Mayan ruins. That could be interesting. A Western game that explores um, some of the Mesoamerican side of things would be definitely very interesting. There's interactions with other, factions, races. You've got all kinds of different people to interact with, and in some cases, all kinds of different creatures to interact with in a Western setting. So when it comes to stuff like this, a lot of times when I do these episodes, I tell you to check your D&D at the door. In this case, I honestly think you can let D&D inform your design philosophy in a Western setting, depending on the story you're trying to tell, obviously. Just like not all fantasy games will end up being D&D, but you can let your spirit of adventure and your design philosophy that you get from running D&D day in and day out, week in and week out, to help inform your Western game. Now you have to be careful that it doesn't just become reskinned D&D. That's an active possibility. Whenever you kind of let your D&D instincts drive, that's why a lot of games that aren't fantasy RPGs fall apart in a lot of groups. So you'll need to be careful with that. But for the most part, all of the ingredients are there. If you've got a party who loves exploring, you can definitely explore a Western setting. If they like role play, there's all kinds of stuff you can do with role play. Interactions with local law enforcement, trying to keep the peace in a town, dealing with a gang running amok, helping the locals make peace with the local Native Americans, dealing with the U.S. Army, the people who were out there running away from Eastern civilization, and the Native Americans, and the conflict between the three. You see stuff like that in Red Dead Redemption 2, which is a great example of Western storytelling. I'll be coming back to that in just a little bit. But yeah, I wanted to talk about that before we get into the kinds of stories that you typically find in Westerns. So yeah, let's dig into some of the stories that you could tell and turn into adventures for your group. So, the first one I want to mention is the Defend the Town, Last Stand, Tame the Town story. These stories are a drifter comes into town, or townspeople hire some guns to defend them from an outlaw group. Something is threatening a town, or someone is threatening a town, and an individual or individuals have to step up to defend it. A good example of this, historically, is the Alamo. The Last Stand at the Alamo in very, very early Western history. That's the 1820s, so a little afield of what a true Western would be, but the spirit of the Alamo very much lives on in what people do following those events, especially when it comes to storytelling like this. But as far as movies go that have stuff like this, you're looking at the Magnificent Seven, High Plains Drifter, another great Clint Eastwood movie, Tombstone, Hondo, a great John Wayne movie, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, also a great John Wayne movie. There's a movie in 2004 or 5, maybe even 2006, called Appaloosa with Viggo Mortensen in it. That's very much in this vein. Pale Rider, another great Clint Eastwood movie, where he plays a circuit rider, a circuit preacher, rather. Just had to Carmex it up there. Lips have been very dry today. Anyway. Those are your defend the town, last stand examples. If you want to see kind of how those stories play out in the movies. But, translating that to a role-playing game seems, fairly straightforward. Your party comes into town, they encounter maybe the gang that's causing trouble, or maybe they bring the trouble with them, depending on kind of where in your story this particular story happens. Maybe your players bring the trouble with them, and out of obligation feel the need to defend the town. To give Elfie a shout here, the Western episode with Commander Worf and Alexander in Star Trek: The Next Generation, that is a defend the town Western. As is Six Guns of the Apocalypse, I think is what it's called. The Red Dwarf episode. Let's see. Gunmen of the Apocalypse, that's what it's called. Great episode of Red Dwarf, by the way. Anyway. Yes, that's a Defend the Town episode. The both Gunmen of the Apocalypse and I can't remember the name of that war episode, but it's great. So, the next common Western story, the Manhunt. This is where... Oh, I just remembered the name of that Star Trek episode. Fistful of Datas. That's what it was called. Because, again, reference to Fistful of Dollars. So yeah, Fistful of Datas from Star Trek is a Defend the Town Western. But anyway, Manhunt Westerns. You can tell these, by the name. It's about hunting someone. Whether that someone is someone who's been kidnapped, like in The Searchers or Big Jake, two amazing John Wayne movies. Whether they're hunting an outlaw, like in True Grit, or For a Few Dollars More. Revenge killing, like in Rio Lobo. I think Slow West also deals with a revenge killing. Basically, this is where the protagonists are hunting someone or something. They are actively searching out someone who was kidnapped or someone who needs to be brought in. We'll see the reverse in just a couple minutes. But, this is, this is straight out of, something like The Witcher. Or, any kind of hunt down this bad guy who's been causing trouble quest that you would send your party on in D&D. This is a great introductory adventure to get your players hooked on a Western world. Give just 1 second here. Sorry, I am a little bit congested, shall we say. Anyway, this is you could use this as, Intro to Westerns 101. Would probably just combine two naming conventions for college courses there. But if you're going to do the whole, you meet in a saloon rather than a tavern, as I mentioned last time, perfectly acceptable. If you're going to do something like that, one of the best things to do is have someone's wanted poster there. And, the party, especially if there's bounty hunters in the party, Bounty hunters are a big part of westerns. That could get them to work together. Going to chase down an outlaw. It's, yeah. Excuse me, sorry. That's a great place to, like I said, start an adventure, get to know people, and give them a chance to do role play, to interact with the local law enforcement who put up the bounty, interact with the townsfolk, find out who this person is, even interacting with the criminal. Exploration. You have to find him. You have to track him down, and combat. What happens when you find him? What happens when you find him and he's got a gang of 15 men with him? Skin that smoke wagon and see what happens. Means draw your gun, for anyone, again, who hasn't seen Tombstone. So yeah, manhunts. After that, we get the reverse situation of manhunts, that being outlaws on the run. So, in this case, instead of hunting someone, the party is being hunted. This is where something like Red Dead Redemption or Red Dead Redemption 2... Red Dead Redemption is actually more of a manhunt scenario, the first one. Since you're hunting down Bill Williamson, Javier Escuela, and then ultimately Dutch. But Red Dead Redemption 2 is outlaws on the run. Through a misunderstanding, or maybe something they actually did, depending on your party. If your party wants to run Renegade, they might run afoul of some law enforcement, or a Native American tribe, or another gang of outlaws, but they'll be hunted. For inspiration here, you can see something like The Outlaw Josie Wales, another fantastic Clint Eastwood movie about an ex-Confederate who refuses to turn himself in, goes on the run, goes into hiding. It's an interesting movie. You say ex-Confederate, and in kind of the environment that we're in, with some of the historical background, you might immediately be predisposed to dislike Josie Wales. The interesting thing about the character of Josie Wales, though, he's not someone who fights for the Confederacy out of a belief in the noble cause, as some Confederates called it following the war. Josie Wales becomes a Confederate raider because the Union soldiers burn down his farm and kill his son and rape and kill his wife. So it's an exploration of, I'm not with you guys, I'm against them, and then having to turn himself over to that force that ruined his life and took him from being a farmer to being a man of action, a man of combat, a man who's lived by the sword. That's where kind of the complexity comes in with the Outlaw Josie Wales. You can play into stuff like that with your characters, where circumstances beyond their control have forced them basically into becoming outlaws. That's a great story to tell, and one that would bring in a lot of conflict and be something cool for your players. And if you want to go historical with this, the movie with Brad Pitt, The Assassination of Jesse James by the Coward Robert Ford. That's a good movie. Again, it chronicles the end days of Jesse James' life, when he was, again, on the run, had taken up the name. The last name he took was Howard. I always remember that because, one, it's mine, and two, the song, I think it's called The Ballad of Jesse James. Rob Ford was the coward that shot Mr. Howard and laid Jesse James in his grave. Or Bob Ford was the coward, yeah. Great song. Bruce Springsteen on his, I think it's called, what's that? Bruce Springsteen did an Americana album where he sung that song. Let's see. Woody Guthrie also did a version of this. If we go down to his discography here. It is We Shall Overcome, the Seeger Sessions. Yeah. And it's a tribute to Peter Seeger. But one of the songs that he sings is Jesse James. Which is a fantastic song. I'll just reiterate. And he played it with... he played it in a session with a bunch of... like a bunch of rural musicians. It's a great... I shouldn't talk about that album. I'll just start gushing about it. It's a great album, though. If you like that kind of thing. If you don't, then you won't enjoy it, because it's acoustic Americana music, and if you don't like Bruce Springsteen, you don't like Bruce Springsteen. So, but, anyway. That's enough of me talking about Bruce Springsteen. Let's get to the next kind of Western, that being the treasure hunt. You can definitely see where stuff like this comes in. Especially like for D&D. Whether it's someone buried some Confederate gold out here, we robbed a bank 6 years ago, we hid the money, now we have to go find it. Someone's moving gold in an armored wagon, like in the movie The War Wagon, another great John Wayne film. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a treasure hunt movie. There's all kinds of things to find out in the desert. And this gives you a lot of exploration. And in some cases, a lot of role-playing. One thing that might be interesting, this would be an interesting one-shot. Have a situation like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where everyone is after that treasure. They're not necessarily friends. Maybe they're even hostile towards each other. Everyone has a different goal for what they want to do with that treasure, though. And at the end, when they find it, play out what happens. Be an interesting one-shot. Is someone... is the party going to work together? Do they decide to split it? Does someone want to double-cross? Good stuff. Not great for a campaign, unless you're looking to end a campaign this way. But great for a one-shot, in my opinion. Now, a treasure hunt without those elements is perfectly fine for a campaign. It'd be a great situation there. Now, next story is the Escort Across the Plains. This is where something like 3:10 to Yuma comes in. Both the original and the remake with Russell Crowe. Good movie as well. I used to not like it, but I also used to be a jackass. I still am a jackass in a lot of ways, but I used to hate that movie for the wrong reasons. Mostly because Christian Bale was in it, and I went through a phase where I hated Christian Bale. But anyway. Basically, you have to take someone or something, because this also would apply to like a cattle drive, like you see in Rawhide or Lonesome Dove, where you have to basically safely escort someone or something to another town across the plains where you're dealing with outlaws who want what you have, cattle rustlers if you've got a cattle drive, people who want the outlaw that you're taking to the train dead, people trying to rescue the outlaw, on and on. All kinds of stuff that you can do there. I recently did that in my Dark Sun game, and I'm actually doing it again. Although right now the thing being escorted across the plains is the players. But, those kinds of stories are great. Don't rely on them too heavily because no one likes escort missions. But, if it fits with the story, if it's something the players want to do, then yeah, there's precedent for it. And then the last Western story that I want to talk about is the approach of civilization. At the top of the episode, I mentioned that a lot of Westerns are about people wanting to escape the society of the eastern United States, and sometimes that society follows them out west. Red Dead Redemption 2 and Red Dead Redemption 1 are a great example of this. Usually these are set in the 1880s or 1890s, into the 1900s, at the very latest into the 1910s. A great example of this would be The Shootist with John Wayne, the last movie that John Wayne made, where he plays a dying gunfighter. I believe The Unforgiven is like this as well, a movie where Clint Eastwood plays an aging gunslinger. Big Jake, which I mentioned as far as a Manhunt movie, it's also like this. It's set in 1909, and Jake is very much an old school rancher, so it's a lot of him dealing with the march of civilization. But there's a lot of great things to be mined there, especially with a character. If someone's playing an older character or someone's playing a character with a sordid past that they're running from, the approach of civilization can always make for an interesting story, because with civilization coming right behind them, there's a lot of conflict there. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency is always good fodder for something like this. For anyone who doesn't know, they basically functioned as the FBI before the FBI existed. They would chase people across state lines. They were hired security, essentially. They'd protect trains. They'd protect post carriages. But they would also assist in manhunts, because a lot of times working with local law enforcement would be very difficult. A county sheriff or a town marshal can only pursue someone within a certain jurisdiction. And with, a lot of these places being territories rather than states, it's easy for someone to slip into and out of multiple jurisdictions, so you need someone like the Pinkertons to chase them. So that's one way that you can do it with the approach of civilization. Now, moving from the GM side, although GMs can certainly make use of this resource as well, I want to talk a little bit about some of the characters that you can portray and encounter in the Wild West. So obviously you've got, your lawmen, your gunslingers, drifters, soldiers, Native Americans, and a lot of these will kind of, crisscross, mix and match. You could be, a drifter who's an ex-Confederate, because, you can play ex-Confederate soldiers in a Western setting, and they're very much there. A Native American gunslinger, Native American lawman, if you want to be like Walker, Texas Ranger. Freedmen are another big one. Former slaves, former African American soldiers. There were a lot of freedmen in the West because out west they could get work and basically be treated as equals. A lot of cowboys were former slaves, escaped slaves, uh, free men who wanted to leave the East Coast. A lot of them drifted west and ended up making lives for themselves out there. So that's something that you could play into Immigrants. There were a lot of Chinese immigrants, a lot of Italians, a good amount of Germans, and a lot of Jewish people as well. Basically, you come into Ellis Island. Maybe the East Coast is too crowded for you. You see this in the movie Fievel Goes West, even though it's not that great of a movie. Fievel and his family, they move from New York to out west. Now, they're tricked into it, but they move out west. People would actually do that. Because out west, you could get land, become a farmer, do something like that. Not necessarily have to live in a hovel in 5 Points like you would if you stayed in New York. So there's all types of different characters, and when you add in elements like the Weird West, and you've got influences from Native American shamanism, with the heavy population of Chinese and Japanese immigrants, you can bring in kind of Eastern stuff as well. There's a lot of East meets West media out there that's very interesting. One of the best examples of this, or I don't know if best is the right term for it, but one of the most recognizable examples of this is the David Carradine TV show Kung Fu, where he is a Shaolin monk traveling around the Wild West. Stuff like that is, very cool. Like Deadlands has a whole martial artist profession that you can pursue. So there's all kinds of different people who you'll encounter. There's, townspeople who, are running their businesses. Maybe they used to be someone of notoriety, but they've moved on from that life and have a blacksmith shop or a bakery or something like that. All kinds of cool stuff. So you're not everyone has to be the same like Clint Eastwood or John Wayne type character. There's lots of variation. And when you don't get that variety in your characters, when everyone kind of tries to do the same thing, make the same character, that's when things can get very boring. So definitely keep that in mind as you are creating your Western game. So as far as the broad approach to it, that's that's all I wanted to cover as far as broad approaches, themes, tones that you could adopt in your game. What I'm going to do now, we are going to switch on over to screen share, and I'm going to share some of the Western resources that you can use as far as systems, miniatures, all that stuff. So we'll be taking a look at that here in just a little bit as soon as I get over screen share. Here we are. So, first and foremost, actually give me 1 second. Okay. So, first and foremost, let's talk about Gunfighter's Ball. Now, the game itself, Gunfighter's Ball, is a miniature tactics Wild West war game, basically. It's the game itself is very much more of a war game than anything else. It has its own, rules and everything. You can get it from Knuckle Duster Miniatures. But the main thing that I'm interested in with it is, the characters. the gunfighters. You can get bystanders too. That's something that's cool about this. You know, they have bystander miniatures. So you can get just regular people, bartenders, butchers, dancing girls, a coffin, frontier women, a pharaoh table, a woman in a bath. They have a gunfighter casualties pack. For $15, you can get a bunch of dead gunfighters. That's interesting. I like that. I like that a lot. Laborers. Robber Baron. But they also, and this is what I've gotten from them in the past, they also have gunfighters. And some of them are just like regular gunfighters. A lot of them are based on certain characters that you would recognize from Western movies. Like this guy right here, Anglo Eyes. That's Angel Eyes from Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It's Lee Van Cleef's character. And if you look, I mean, here there's a bounty hunter figure that's pretty much Blondie from Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Clint Eastwood's Man with No Name character. So yeah, they've got the individual fighters. They're all like $5 a piece, which as far as miniatures go isn't terrible. But they also have like historical figures. And for that, I'm actually going to go over to the, if we go here, we'll go to the factions. Faction packs. And we can take a look at some of the, you know, good guys, bad guys. But if we go here to the, you know, cowboy faction, these are the cowboys from Tombstone. Like right here, I've got Curly Bill Brocious. I also have Wyatt Earp, who I just recently painted. And I grabbed one of the other ones that I painted a long time ago, but this is one of the... I don't remember what this guy's name is, but he's just like a generic sheriff character. Looks very much like Chuck Connors from The Rifleman. And partly that's because he has a Winchester. And that's his primary weapon, is that Winchester. Let's see if I can straighten this out. No, it seems like I'm going to break that. It'll be okay. But yeah, these things are great. My only gripe with them is sometimes the 6-guns look weird. But a revolver is a very hard shape to make look good in this size and scale. So I understand it. A lot of times, even with like the best miniatures, the guns look really cartoony. But if you look here at the good guy faction pack, you've got like, first of all, you have a character who's very clearly John Wayne right there. But you also have, you know, a guy with a guitar and stuff like that. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff that you can find here. If you're looking for just generic Western miniatures, this is a good place to go. They're inexpensive and they're really cool. Another good place to go for generic Western miniatures, if we look here, go to Western. Reaper has a good collection of Western miniatures. These are their Chronoscope figures, but they also have Deadlands figures too. Excuse me. So here you're seeing some of the Western characters that they have, but if we just go to the regular figure finder, any material, Western, you can see some of these other things. Graveyard sets. Let's see if we can find specifically the Savage World stuff. Because one thing they have here, some of the monsters that are particular to Deadlands are present in this setting, or in these miniature lines. So yeah, like here you've got U.S. Agent, Huckster, Texas Ranger. These are Savage World specific miniatures. If we keep going down, you can see some of the specific villains from Deadlands here, like Raven, Dr. Darius Hellstrom, Stone, Reverend Grimm. And then I think if we look this up here, we should be able to find it. The Hangin Judge. This is my favorite Deadlands monster. It's basically an undead judge with a bayoneted revolver who sentences everyone to death. It's cool. It's great. So yeah, there's that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention for miniatures, because I just saw this, the game Zombicide. There's an expansion, or a new version, that is Undead or Alive. It's a Western set. And right now, we're in kind of the final days of the Kickstarter here. But it comes with 88 figures. So what you'd be looking at here, you get some survivors, some, gunfighters and stuff like that, but you also get a bunch of monster minis, which work for if you're doing a Weird West game. You also get a Gatling gun, which is important for any kind of Weird West game where that would come into play. But yeah, here in the Kickstarter campaign, you've got some that are specific to the Kickstarter, like Billy the Kid, Jesse James. There's another Wyatt Earp here. There's Doc Holliday, Wild Bill. So yeah, that's there for another. How many days are left here? 15 days if you want to jump on that. I haven't played this. I just saw it and I thought it looked cool. So, mentioning it here. So yeah, that's another place to get Western miniatures. And if nothing else, we can mosey on over to Amazon here and show you kind of the cheapest option for... cheapest option for a buttload of miniatures. If you just need, like, generic cowboys, Native Americans, that kind of stuff. These sets that you find online. I got a pack like this a while back. It's a 72 pack of these plastic cowboys and Indians, basically. Some of them come with horses and stuff like that. This set here, you get a wagon and some totem poles, a teepee, a canoe, stuff like that. But if you're looking for cheap miniatures, you don't necessarily want to paint them all. This might be your golden ticket here. And you can get as many as like 144. Some of them you can get with horses, all that kind of stuff. These like dollar store plastic figures, you guys remember the little green army men? They have those for cowboys too. So there's that. So yeah, those are miniatures. To talk about some of the options that you have as far as systems, obviously Deadlands. You guys know how I feel about Deadlands. It's great. If you're doing a Weird West game, this is my highest recommendation here. If you want something that's of a different flavor, though, and I don't know if they still make this actively, but White Wolf did have a Weird West setting called Werewolf the Wild West. which is it's a historical setting for Werewolf the Apocalypse. And all 13 Guru tribes are there. It just kind of adds a Western flavor to Werewolf the Apocalypse, which is very kind of Native American themed. So a lot of that stuff kind of carries over. It sounds interesting. I've never played Werewolf. I've never played anything by White Wolf, so I don't know if I don't know how that would play out. I imagine you could probably do vampire in the Wild West too. That would be very interesting, especially if they're interacting with each other. But moving beyond Weird West, one of the highest recommended Western games that's just straight up Wild West is Aces and Eights by Kenzer and Company. And what Aces and Eights is kind of best known for is the to hit chart, where you roll to see where you hit, and certain rolls, it'll be a headshot, chest shot, all that kind of stuff. And if I'm not mistaken, Aces and Eights also uses cards, the way that Savage Worlds does. Again, I'm not completely sure on that, but I think so. If you want to get even older, old school with stuff like that, back in the day, TSR and now Wizards of the Coast owns the copyright for it, but you also have Boot Hill, which is this would be like your OSR Western game. You can get it soft cover on demand on Drive-Thru RPG for $16. All kinds of stuff here with Boot Hill, a lot of adventures and stuff like that. So yeah, that's an option for you. They have second edition as well. I don't know if they have first edition, but they've got Boot Hill stuff on Drive-Thru RPG that you can get from Wizards. So, if you want to play some OSR stuff, that's an option for you. And if you don't necessarily want to go the Wizards route, of course, I have to shout out one of my guys, one of the all-time greats, Carl Kiesler. He has his own Western game from Doghouse Rules called Sidewinder Recoil. Or Sidewinder Recoiled. Cinematic, OGL rules. So I believe this would be, I think this would be like a D20 game, basically. But yeah, this would be more of the, this would definitely be more of the regular Wild West than what Deadlands would be. It's got a couple other games here: Buckshots, Triple Barreled, which is an adventure. But yeah, Sidewinder Recoil. That's another option if you want to go off the beaten path a little bit and support someone who I really love on the show. So, that's Westerns. That's what it comes down to when it comes to making a Western RPG. Those are the core elements. These are some of the games that you can play, resources as far as miniatures go. And honestly, I don't understand why more people don't play Western games. I know that Westerns they're not as fashionable as they used to be. That's just the cold hard truth, unfortunately. Westerns are kind of a product of the 60s and 70s. People got very much burnt out on Westerns, and they're not really in the cultural zeitgeist anymore. That being said, for those of you who, like me, love your westerns, love your cowboy stuff, want to explore that world in a role-playing scenario, these are some of your best options. And honestly, these are some great options. These are some great games. And I look forward to forcing some people to play Deadlands with me so I can use these Western minis that I've got sitting around here. So I can use all the cool stuff that I'm getting from the Kickstarter. I'm excited to play some Western games this year. And I hope other people will be equally excited because we're going to have a blast. I'm going to have a blast. And I'm going to make you have a blast as well. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's episode. As far as next week goes, I'm expecting Deadlands to be here sometime this week, so we'll probably do something next Saturday. As far as a review, this Saturday we don't have anything going on, so there's not going to be a stream on Saturday. But next week, I'm going to try and get an interview scheduled. I don't know if I can or not, but I'll see what I can do. If not, I'll keep you guys posted on what we're talking about. Probably not going to do another How Ryan Would Run, but if we are, there's a couple genres that I haven't touched on that would be interesting to talk about. A couple types of games. Even within the context of fantasy, there's a couple things I could talk about. So, that could be coming down the pipe. But until then, guys, whether you rolled a 1 or a 20, I'm so glad that you rolled your bones with me, Ryan Howard, and I'll see you next time.